It's that time of year again. Your buddy has an opening in one of his leagues because somebody dipped and you're his first go-to. And because you're a dynasty addicted fool, much like me, you graciously accept the challenge. And of course, like most orphan teams, it's more than you bargained for. Well, me and Zach got you covered. As always, I do hope you all enjoy the video. Please leave a like if you do. Comment down below your thoughts on the video itself. And be sure to drop any tips you may have when it comes to orphaned dynasty rebuilds. But hey, with all that said, let's get right to the content you came for. So Zach, we are here today to talk about how to rebuild an orphan team. You and I have discussed this at length of, what we do kind of taking over an orphan team. And the first thing I think you have to understand is one of the harsh realities is that these teams usually not good. And usually there's a reason why they're orphans. And it's usually like league inactivity, the person who had the team before, trade all their assets to win now, and now they don't want to deal with the aftermath of doing things like that, whatever the case is. So basically with this video, how do we proceed in taking over an orphan team? You and I have so much experience, like I already mentioned. So what are the first steps you would say, looking at the league, looking at the roster? What do you want to do when it comes to looking at, what are your first steps taking over an orphan team?
The first thing is, and we have talked about this in the past, is just kind of like cultivating that relationship with your league, is just like introducing yourself to the league. And sometimes you can do that with smack talk, send a gif of you holding up a championship belt, like a WWE gif. Send something that's funny, but it's a little bit of trash talk so that people know you're an active member. Because the most important thing is like the relationships you have in the league. If you want to trade, it takes two. And so you got to cultivate those relationships. And that's really like that's the first thing I do. Even before, when you enter the league and you haven't been assigned a team yet, I'm still talking trash. I'm like, oh, about time you guys got some real members in here. Something funny, just kind of break the ice with the new people in the league, but let them know that you're like an active participant, because you're going to have to be. You're going to have to be active to rebuild an orphan team. And then the next thing I do is you should know the league scoring before you accept the job. Right? You should know whether it's super flex, whether it's tight end premium, full PPR, half PPR, standard scoring, whatever it may be. You need to know the league scoring, because each scoring system, Bob, I don't want to say it favors certain positions, but it increases the value of certain positions, right? Single quarterback league, non-tight end premium, half point PPR, running backs are the most important thing. Full PPR, wide receivers are the most important thing, or pass catching running backs. So you need to know the scoring, because that's what you need to identify on your roster. And then, of course, taking a look at the roster, taking a look at the overall theme of the roster, right? Can this team compete? Can this team get to the playoffs? If not, then let's say, this team last year finished 4-10, then you need to identify long-term players to build around. When we do an audit, we call them core players. You need to identify core players on that team, because those are the pieces you're going to hypothetically build around. I always start with trying to cultivate relationships. I want to trash talk everybody. I want to let everybody know I'm open for business, that I'm easy to talk to, and I'm fun. Know your league format. And then you have to examine your roster and see whether it's a roster that can compete. It's a roster that can compete long-term, because ultimately that's what you want. You want a roster that can compete for a few years, not just one or two. Otherwise, you might be in a situation where you're giving up that team and somebody else takes the orphan, because you just don't want to deal with that headache. Identify the strengths and weaknesses of the team. And, I'm sure we'll get more into this, but I just want to give kind of the overall introduction to when I take over an orphan.
Absolutely dive into the league, be open, be communicative in the DMs, or at least in the league chat. Whatever your vibe is, if you're in people's face like I know Zach is, hey, man, all the more power to you. I'm more chill. I'm just, hey guys, what's up? I'm here to have some fun. That's, that's just how I am. I'm pretty chill. I'm pretty chillax all the time. But the next step for me, and what I'm doing is, like you said, you should know before you get into the league, but absolutely analyze the league settings, because these are things that are going to drastically change player value and positional value and things like that. So make sure you're looking at the starting roster. Make sure you're acknowledging, is it 2 wide receivers and 1 flex? Is it 3 wide receivers and 3 flexes? Is it 2 tight ends? Is it, a quarterback in a super flex spot? Because that just drastically changes how you're going to approach the league. If you have a deep starting roster, you really need to worry about depth. If you're only starting 7 or 8 guys, you want more top end talent. And that, especially when you're going to start looking at making trades, that's going to heavily influence what you do with those players that you have. So, check out the scoring. Is it PPR? Is it 0.5 PPR? Is it tight end premium, et cetera? Does it have a bunch of weird bonuses and things like that? What does that break down to, and how does that kind of affect each position, like you mentioned as well? And then is it a super flex or one quarterback? This seems so simple. I mean, knowing that it's super flex or one quarterback, and that's usually something that's discussed right away before you hop in the league, but or even is it a two quarterback? I've taken over a two quarterback orphan before, and that's been a blast of a league to be in, because obviously that's going to increase the amount of quarterbacks you have on your roster, because you're more than likely saving backup quarterbacks as opposed to kicking them to the curb if it's just regular dynasty with one quarterback, I should say. So definitely analyzing these will help gauge player value and positional values and things like that.
I think a great point that you brought up is like know the bonuses, right? There's some leagues where it's like,
Yeah.
We have a league where it's 2 PPR for tight ends. There are leagues where running backs get bonuses for carries, whatever it may be. Know those bonuses, because that is that's going to matter in terms of how you fill out your team's roster and depth chart. Just know the scoring, know the rules, know the roster format, the starting. I think that was a great point. Are you starting 2 wide receivers? Are you starting 3? I hadn't even thought of that. So just you have to be hyper aware of these things before you even take it's like a job almost. Like, do I want this? Is this a good fit for me? Am I good at this? Am I good at trading for players? Because if not, I better be really good at drafting players. I think we've covered the basics there until we get more into the meat and potatoes.
Sure. The last thing I would add to kind of, see how the scoring impacts certain players, something you can do at least on Sleeper. I don't know about other formats, but you can actually like plug in the scoring and see what those players did last year, see where players ended up last year, see what kind of points they're scoring in the all categories, see where positions line up. Is it all quarterbacks at the top with some running backs sprinkled in, and the top end wide receivers sprinkled in, and maybe a tight end? Or is it, it's all quarterbacks? Like, it's just straight up get quarterbacks, and or whatever the case is. That can kind of show you and what kind of players are more valuable. Is it is it PPR where there's a bunch of bonuses for 10 receptions in a game and things like that? That can kind of tell you what direction certain players, like, are the PPR magnets the big names that are, a little ahead of the guys who make the big splash plays, like Jamar Chase, even though he tends to get quite a few receptions as well. But, it kind of, that can give you a good idea of how players will stack up, and types of players in their own positions can kind of stack up. After you look at the league settings and you're very comfortable with that, and you're, use whatever vast information you have beforehand of, running your own leagues before it becomes an orphan or anything like that, analyze the roster you're given is the next step for me. And I think the big thing right off the rip is to figure out where the team's going. Look at the team trajectory. Anytime we dive into an audit, we want to know where the team's going before we really get into making any moves, because we don't want to just trade for good players or players we think are good at good values. We don't want to trade for Zeke Elliott when it's very clear that we're a rebuilding team. We don't want to trade for Mike Evans. We don't want to trade for Michael Thomas, things like that. And if you're in a rebuild, you almost don't want to buy one of these big names in a Jamar Chase or a Justin Jefferson, because it's going to cost you all the draft capital you're using to claw back in. Is it a contender? Is it a rebuild? Is it a complete teardown? How I look back at this, I kind of try to take a look back at the year before. If you're able to go into the league history, see where the team that you have finished last year, and if it makes sense. Zach, you were talking before we started recording about the team that you just took over was the first place team, but the team is trash. All of the assets that helped it become a championship team are now null and void. And that's kind of one of those things where that could be deceiving. Maybe if you did not think about, matching up, like, yes, it was a championship team last year, so I should be able to compete. That would have made a lot of different decisions for you in what you did in, taking over this orphan. But I think that's so huge. What are some ways that for you that you kind of find to establish the team trajectory of, are we contending? Are we rebuilding? Like I said at the beginning, there's usually a reason these teams are orphan. The harsh reality is these teams aren't very good, but that's why we're here. That's why you're taking over this team to, build it up to something much better. So Zach, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you kind of, establish a trajectory, and maybe what types of moves you make when you decide whatever that trajectory is.
Yeah, I mean, I look at every orphan that I take over in basically one of three directions. Can this team compete for the long term? If not, it's a 1 year rebuild. That's another one. So it's either can this team compete for the long term? Is this a 1 year rebuild or is this a 2 year rebuild? In my opinion, no rebuild should take more than 2 years because at a certain point, you're donating money into people's pockets. I don't want to do that. I want to win money. And if you do this right, you'll have draft capital, you'll have young players, you'll have players in the prime of their career, like hypothetically a Tyreek Hill right now, that people are going to want. So I identify every team as one of those three. Absolutely. Go look at the performance of the team last year, but look at why. You brought up the example of an orphan team I just took over, won a championship last year. And I took over the team and I'm like, oh, cool. You got a solid base. Went to set the starting lineup. I have no second quarterback in a super flex. And I'm saying to myself, how did this team win a championship? Did some digging. Rashad Penny and Justin Jackson in week 16 last year. Dude went off. I think he had like 30 fantasy points. So clearly, not really a team built to win long term. So you have to identify it. You have to look at the team. How did they perform? And why did they perform that way? Why did this team win a championship? Certainly didn't have any young building blocks. And as a matter of fact, the rookie draft had already happened that league. He made no rookie picks. So the dude sold his soul to win that championship and then left the league. So identify, what category the team fits in and why. Why do they fit in that? Why is this a 2 year rebuild? Do you have no young players, but you have players that are attractive in trade? That's to me a 2 year rebuild. I could try to compete for a playoff spot in this league. I'll probably be 6-8, miss out on the playoffs, and have the seventh pick in the rookie draft, which is kind of like no man's land. Last year, you didn't want the seventh pick, right? You wanted one of the first two running backs and one of the first three or four wide receivers. Really, you have to identify right away, build the plan, and follow through on that plan. Now, look, for me, part of taking over an orphan team is I always have players I like no matter what, and I think you know that, Bob. I like A.J. Dillon. I like Michael Pittman. I like Amon-Ra St. Brown. There's certain players that I like no matter what format, almost, because I believe in their ceiling, their ability to be a top 5 or a top 10 player at their position. If you have those, see if they're on your roster. See if you can go out and trade for those. But if not, and I know you don't agree with this, Bob, but I don't care. I use the trade block. This guy's for sale. This guy's for sale. This guy. It's a whole list. And you've seen it before, Bob.
Yep.
And you know what I'll do if I don't get a hit in a day, Bob? I'll wait till the chat. I'll wait till the chat's active again. Hey, here's a reminder: Devin Singletary on the market, Adam Thielen on the market, T.J. Hockenson on the market. Refresh people and their minds that these players are available. Now, it really depends like what time of the year this is too, right? Certain teams week 1 didn't go as well as they planned, or it went a little bit better and they're like, oh, I just need one more piece. You could have that piece that they need. Constantly be refreshing the league's memory that your players are available. I know Bob doesn't believe in that. I don't care. It has worked for me. and I'm in a league with Bob, and he knows it because I keep doing it and I keep making moves. And, as long as you have an active league, people that are actively engaged and want to better their team, and especially if the waiver wire is not a factor and trade is really the only way to make your team better, be at the front line of your league's chat when it's active.
Once we've kind of established a trajectory, figuring out what team needs we have and making picks that kind of make sense. Like if you're a full rebuild, you don't really need a running back right away. Like you'd rather build a wide receiver than acquire the running backs when they're starting to get in the prime of their career. So identifying team needs that fit whatever trajectory you're picking. If you're, say that competitive team that could compete, that's maybe a piece away, maybe that's where you go buy one of the more expensive running backs that could help you push you over the edge, kind of a thing. But like I said, it doesn't really make sense to do that. If you're not even sniffing the playoffs, why go buy Javonte Williams or anybody like that? Go ahead.
What I'll say quickly there, Bob, I didn't mean to cut you off, but what I'll say quickly there is if you can identify these players before they break out, that's how you set up your team to compete in 2 years. You might be able to finesse, as I always say, finesse a trade for a player that hasn't broken out yet, but everything is there for them to do so.
And then moving on to the next point, you touched on this a little bit ago, identifying core players we want to build around. I think this is crucial because, this all kind of matches with the team trajectory. If you're in a competing mode, older players can be, players we want to build around for at least the time being, like a Tyreek Hill we keep bringing up. And, but if you're on that rebuild side of things, good running backs that are really good right now, they're just players that have trade value that you should be moving off your team. But if you're in that rebuild, and which, let's be honest, a lot of these orphan teams, like we've kind of discussed already, usually are, a good running back on your team is going to be a heck of a lot more worth to you and, melted down into draft picks as opposed to racking up points in your starting lineup and all things like that. So all things considered, when it comes to identifying core players, for me, I want to try to find players that, match my team trajectory and then look out for the next 2 to 3 years. I want to make sure those players are more than likely still have a value window where they're also putting up production. Those are the bare minimum for core players. And it's, guys I like, guys I want to build a team around, guys that I want to win a championship with, something you've touched on before in the past as well, that these are guys that you just like, that match your trajectory and have that 2 to 3 year window where you feel like you can build this team up to win a championship with those players. Zach, what else do you look for in core players, or what do you also look for in core players?
Yeah, I think something that's really important and something that we can help you out here on the Dynasty Rewind is knowing next year's draft class, because I want to tailor my team to need in next year's draft what is the strength of the draft. So last year, I was really not shaping my team to need a running back. If I needed to identify players in the draft, I was leaving my teams a gaping hole at wide receiver. Let's flip this now to 2023, Bob. If I'm identifying my core players, what is the draft really good at in 2023?
Running
backs, and also supposedly quarterbacks if you're in a super flex. I'm identifying players either on my team that are core players or that I can trade for that will be core players that are wide receivers and tight ends, because I don't want to need those in next year's draft. Or like you said, players that I like, that I want to win a championship with, or just players that I've inherited that are young, valuable assets that I can build this team around. If I inherited a team, let's say again, Kenneth Walker, I'm trying to build a long-term competitive team to win multiple championships. I'm not trying to win one. I'm trying to win multiple. So I would say, listen, look at your roster. What players do you look at there as young pieces that you can build around in 2 to 3 years? It's never about right now, unless you fit into that category of I've already inherited a competitive team, which, as we said, is like 2% of the time. It's very rare that you inherit a team that's built for long-term success. So identify which category you fit in, which players fit in that category, which players fit in my 2-year rebuild, or which players fit in me competing next year, and then build the roster around that. But really, really important, I don't think people talk about it enough, is identify the strength of next year's draft. You don't get one of those 2 or 3, it's going to be another year. It's going to be another year for you. And even then, it's going to take those players a year or two to really mature. Like, most rookies are not Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson. Most rookies are Garrett Wilson, Michael Pittman, Chris Olave. They start slow, they get integrated into the offense, and then year 2 or 3, they really take off. Follow Dynasty Rewind. The guys over at the pod, Mike, Nate, Chev, and Pork do a fantastic job. They're already identifying players in 2023, 2024. You want to make sure that you know that information to know what you're going to be looking at in terms of your team build in 2020.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that you mentioned. An undersold point is kind of knowing, and this just is good info to just be ahead of the game.
Mm-hmm.
Know what classes are good with what. Take a look at the Devy community. You don't have to join a Devy league to be able to know that, hey, this draft class is better at this and that. Just look ahead, look at the notes. There are plenty of resources out there that suggest that. We have stuff here going on where we're highlighting some players in those future classes as well. But it is one of those things where knowing what the draft class ahead is can kind of help you. And it's a little nuance to it because you're not sure where those picks are going to end up, things like that. But to know that there's more running back depth in next year's class after this class being so kind of devoid of some talent, being able to make that move, like you said, of, setting yourself up to need wide receivers this year, need running back next year in the draft class. And another point you've touched on in the past too is to adjust yourself based on the strengths of the draft class versus your needs.
Mm-hmm.
If the draft class doesn't meet your needs, you need to make another move. You need to find another way to make a move. So the next step for me, identifying players that have trade value that you don't really have on your team or that don't necessarily fit your team trajectory. So that doesn't, if you're a rebuilding team, we keep bringing up Tyreek Hill, but to bring up Tyreek Hill, if you're a rebuilding team, doesn't do much good for you. Identify players that have trade value and players that you don't see fitting into your long-term plan. And then those players are getting moved around. Take a look at the league, see where other teams are at, where teams may have holes, and then go from there, because that's where you can really make some good moves where, especially if you find somebody that has that symbiotic relationship with you, where say you're the rebuilding team, hey, I need youth and, depth and picks. You need guys that you can plug into a lineup and win you a week. Here's Tyreek Hill. Chris Olave isn't doing much for you. I'll take him and this pick, which, in an 8-year window, Chris Olave, I think, is probably going to score more points than Tyreek Hill in the next 8 years, just based off of Tyreek Hill is going to be out of the league at some point. So it's one of those things where, this step is identify who you can move off this team that you can utilize to build for the future. Or do you have a Chris Olave that you could use to dangle in front of the Tyreek Hill owner that's maybe off to a bad start for the season? Maybe they're out of the playoff run. Maybe it's the middle of the season. And you can be like, hey, I think Chris Olave is going to be great in the future, but I would love to have a better wide receiver now. Can we make a deal? This is where you reach out, you finesse, you make your deals based off of, what can you do to help another team to help yourself better for the future?
I would say closer to the trade deadline is when a lot of action is going to happen in your league. And so your team may be out of it after 4 weeks, but that doesn't mean you have to trade that player at week 4, right? Because the closer you get to the trade deadline, Bob, the more desperate other people become. Like, let's say right now, a team that you view as a competitive team is, hypothetically speaking, 2-2 on the season. But the trade deadline comes and they're 7-3. Now, Tyreek Hill's a lot more appetizing in a trade than when that team was 2-2, because they weren't sure if they were competing. They weren't sure if they were in it for a playoff spot or in a championship window. And now, look, you're 7-3. Tyreek Hill puts you over the top. Again, I'm somebody that always has dialogue with my trades. I'm not just here's a trade-off. Most of the times, I message the owner first, and I say, I have a dialogue. Is this player available? What are you looking for? So I know if I can make an offer. So a lot of times listen, you're 7-3. You're there. This guy will put you over the top. Let's make a deal. And so, my point there, Bob, is you don't have to make a trade right away. Wherever you are in your fantasy season, there is a trade deadline. Find out when it is. Find out the specific day and the specific time, because you can use that to your advantage. Wait to get what you want. Now, don't be greedy. Don't be stupid, because if you hang on to Tyreek Hill and he turns 29 next year and he tears his Achilles in week 15 because the Dolphins are 7-6 trying to compete for they're in the hunt for the 20th year, you're going to lose the value. You're going to be left holding the bag on Tyreek Hill. Make sure that you do move those players that you do not view as part of your whatever plan it is, whether it's your 1-year window, your 2-year window, or your a championship window. Make sure you move or acquire those pieces that can help you in the next year or so before it's too late.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think one of the worst things you can do is be too stingy about moving a guy and have his value die on your roster.
Yeah.
That's the last thing I ever want for any of my players while they're on my roster under my watch, to have their value die on my roster. I want them dying on other people's rosters. I want draft picks or any other players that I can get in there instead, whatever upside prospects. The one thing I do want to note with your one point about, maybe waiting on selling players is, what you mentioned too. An injury can happen any time. I know you don't want to play scared, things like that, and that's just, it's a hyperbole to say, well, injuries could happen, because duh. I think too, with that team that's 2-2, they might be a little desperate, honestly, where if they were guns blazing coming into the season thinking, oh man, I'm going to run this league this year. And then they're 2-2 after 4 weeks. Man, they might be looking to make a move, and not saying that they're going to give you anything better, but than they would if, say it was the trade deadline, but it might just be one of those things where there's still a window there. I think it's, where you open up conversation and just, see if he's freaking out a little bit. See if you can't get a little more on that deal and get that deal done that much quicker.
And that's where, the cultivating relationships and knowing the people in your league comes in. If you never had a conversation with this guy, you have no idea how he's feeling right now. You're rebuilding. You really have to get every advantage you can because you're already at such a disadvantage.
Yeah.
You have to look for every nook and cranny that you can find a crumb. Can you sell Fab for draft picks? You have to find these advantages because your back is already against the wall in this league where you didn't do the damage to the team. So now you have to find a way to crawl back to relevancy in that.
Yeah, no, I think that's an awesome point. Finding any avenue where you can get an edge or, sneak one more pick into a trade or just any inch you can take to make a mile. I say go for it. Next thing I'm doing, maybe even before this, is identifying players that have little to no value and just get them off your roster. Use that space for something better off the waiver wire. Some tight end dart throw, some wide receiver dart throw, some running back handcuff, anything you can get on your roster with more upside. I'm talking players that aren't like on rosters anymore. Antonio Brown. I'm going to say Will Fuller. I know there's some people out there that, still believe Will Fuller has value, even though nobody really seems to want him on their team this year. And, he was only good for a handful of weeks if you really look at it outside of one season. So it's one of those things. Get those guys that are, put them on the block, see if you can get anything for them, and just whatever it is, take it. Don't get greedy with guys like this, guys that barely deserve to grace your roster to begin with. At this point in their careers, obviously at one point, Antonio Brown was, a stud, no debate there, and Will Fuller definitely had a place on people's lineups and rosters, but guys like that, get them off your teams and add some upside from the waiver wire. And I know there's the argument too, where, well, if Will Fuller signs somewhere, you can probably flip him for a little more or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, man, that's probably true, but just give me the upside stash. Give me somebody I could throw on a taxi squad, or you never know what's going to be out on the wire. You never know how plugged in the rest of the league is to things. And that's another thing. Another note is be plugged in, see what's going on around the league, see what players are showing up every week and putting up points and things like that. Because there are times where, you can't get to the waiver wire. Some people can't get to the waiver wire every week. Sometimes they miss a week, it happens, where there might be more out there than you think. Always check the waiver wire and pull whatever upside you can, especially if you're rebuilding. If you're contending, it's more of a don't rule anybody out. Don't rule out the Rex Burkheads, picking them up. God knows they could have a good week if you need a flex option, or, don't rule out last year, Justin Jackson. Don't rule that guy out, because if you did, you could have lost yourself a league. If he's putting up 30 points in week 16 and your opponent has him, Mike always makes this point. If you don't feel the need to throw him in your lineup, just go get him so somebody else can't throw him in their lineup and use him against you. And in that essence, it's a great point. So it's one of those things. Figure out who has little to no value, and usually you can sniff them out from a mile away, and then cut them. Add some upside from the waiver wire, just because there's you can try to throw them out on the block, and that's usually my last resort. And I don't disagree with using the block at all. I just don't prefer to use it, because anytime I've used it, it's just sending a beacon for, hey, send me a garbage trade. And if anything, maybe it gets a discussion started. And there are times where it has worked out for me, where I get a deal done that I'm happy with. And I like the implementation on Sleeper for sure. But it is one of those things where it's real hit or miss for me. But with guys like that, who cares? If I'm going to send a trash offer for Antonio Brown or Will Fuller, I can promise you I'm probably going to take it. If I'm being totally honest. If it's a 5th round pick and $1 fab, you, sir, can have a Will Fuller or an Antonio Brown from me. But Zach, what are your thoughts here? Identifying players that have little to no value, cutting them, adding upside for the waiver wire, things like that.
Yeah, I think something that is actually really important is not necessarily having one roster spot open, but having that spot available. And I'll give you an example here. To pick up a player that news may break. And I'll give you a really good example. This is my home league. I'm completely out of it. I'm like 2-10. Everybody knows I'm rebuilding for the future. Last year, the news drops that Adrian Peterson is signing with the Seattle Seahawks. I think it was like week, 11, whatever it was. And, this obviously has to be a league where daily waivers are not running. You can just pick them up, boom, right on your roster. Be the first one. You're following the news. Pick them up on your team. I traded Adrian Peterson 4 days later for Van Jefferson.
Sure.
You have to be able to capitalize on those situations. Again, find every nook and cranny you can and take advantage of it, because you are already behind everybody else in the league. You haven't been here. You don't know these people. You didn't build this roster. You're not responsible for this, but you're damn well going to be responsible for the resurgence of it and a championship in 3 years, because you take advantage of whatever rules are. And it's not necessarily taking advantage of the rules. It's these are the rules in place, and this is what the rules allow me to do. You have to be on top of the waiver wire, because there could be a player who's getting an opportunity in week 16 or week 17 because his team is out of it. That could be a starter on the team next year. And nobody's going to really be interested in that player because that's championship week. And you can just stash that guy in your roster till next year. So you need to kind of have that flexibility, but be paying attention to the news every single day. Get the sleeper alerts. Follow Dynasty Rewind on Twitter, whatever it is, wherever you get your news source. Make sure that you're following. You get notifications, push notifications sent to your phone, because some leagues, it's just the first person to act on those opportunities are the ones that can take advantage of.
I think that's an awesome point. Being able to flip somebody like that, awesome. But I think in general too, just any, having upside on your bench or whatever that, guys you can flip that you might not really see a long-term future with, that you might feel like they're the flavor of the week, but you add them and you flip them to then turn it into a second round pick, turn it into a third round pick, to where that pick is actually somebody that you're drafting that you're that you feel more valuable long-term, or you're using that to trade up in the draft to get a better player still, from whatever position you're inch warming up from. And then, when we're looking at the next point here, identifying possible trade targets to better your team, I'll touch on this point a little bit. There's going to be offers that come in your door right away, but you're still going to want to look around the league and, what trade targets fit your trajectory, see what teams look to be contending or rebuilding. And this is, again, you might think a team's contending. You might think a team's rebuilding. They might feel otherwise. And then when you're sending trade offers, it might not make sense to them if you're sending them Mike Evans and a second round pick for, let's say, hypothetically, a DK Metcalf, because DK is probably maybe going to have a down year with Geno. Who knows? Just something in that vein, where if they feel like, well, I'm rebuilding too, so I'm fine with having DK kind of suck this year, but I don't really want Mike Evans, even though, whatever you can flip Mike Evans for to a competitor is neither here nor there. So it's one of those things where you just got to reach out, but utilize your trade pieces to match up with potential trade partners. What do they need? What do you have to move and make those trades happen? Like I said, ultimately you want to start setting up your team any way you can, whether you're adding, my favorite thing is to add a pick and a prospect is my favorite in a rebuild. At least my favorite thing is add a player that's already in the league, already cooking with value, and then add a pick that's going to ascend in value over the next year or two until that draft happens. That way you're kind of getting immediate return on your investment on whatever you moved. And then you also have something kicking around later in the future that you can use to, maybe that player you get doesn't pan out, but that draft pick does. It gives you 2 rounds in the chamber versus having the one if you were to go 1 for 1 on the deal. Obviously, if you're able to move Adrian Peterson for Van Jefferson, you just go make that move. That's fine. Yeah. I don't have an issue with that at all. That's not quite the same thing. It's just flipping for a future asset, period, which is, flipping a short-term asset for a future asset. But, what do you think about identifying possible trade targets, Zach, in this, when you're coming into a league?
Yep.
How do you identify trade targets that you want to build your team around or, go win a championship with if you feel you're competing off the rip?
Like this goes back to the kind of the conversation we had at the beginning, like, find those players that you like. I typically like a player whether or not they have immediate success. And I'll give you a great example of this last year because I capitalized on it. Amon-Ra St. Brown. I liked Amon-Ra St. Brown. I was thinking of changing my team name to the USC wide receiver room because I already talked about Michael Pittman. Amon-Ra St. Brown was non-existent the first 10 weeks of the 2021 NFL season. So I went to the Amon-Ra St. Brown owner and I said, this dude's doing nothing. Let me trade you something for him. And see if he becomes of course, Amon was a guy who was drafted in the second round, I believe, in that league, second round of the rookie draft. I traded 2 fourth-round picks for Amon-Ra St. Brown, and we all know what happened from there. So, it's about identifying the players that you like. That shouldn't be changing. That shouldn't change, from week 1 to week 4. you should kind of have like a game plan. The moment you take this team over, the moment you figure out the scoring, and the moment you figure out the team trajectory. Okay, what do I need? What's the draft good at next year? And what players do I like? And what players am I going to be targeting for the rest of this year in trades? I'm going to try to target Michael Pittman because I liked his rookie year. I don't think that he's going to break out just yet. I can see it coming. I think he needs a quarterback. I liked Amon-Ra St. Brown. He was non-existent in an offense the first 10 weeks. And you make an offer and say, listen, I don't think this guy's doing very much. I'm kind of interested. Here's a couple picks. And we, at that point, week 10 last year, we knew the 2022 class looking pretty bad. So I wasn't interested in third, fourth round picks. I was like, whatever, you want these? You have them. Have two of them. Like, give me Amon-Ra St. Brown. Let me see what happens there. So like identify the players and stick with that plan. Stick with trying to acquire them. Try to acquire them in week 2. Try to acquire them in week 5. Try to acquire them in week 10. Whatever. Try to buy the rookie dip if you like some of these rookies. Continue to try to trade for them because just because they haven't broken out, if they're a young player, there should be an opportunity as long as you're targeting relative players. You're not targeting Kennedy Brooks. Like target players that are going to have opportunity. Right. Don't be targeting Michael Pirine like Mike over here. Okay?
Ultimately, the first bit in a new league is a huge feeling out process. Like we talked about, analyze the league settings, analyze your team, analyze your league mates too, and on top of that, and have discussions with them. The first thing that usually happens to me, at least when I go into a new league, is my DM is just full of trade offers because they immediately want to see how stupid is this guy? How stupid is this person? What can I get away with? That's always what happens. That's always what it is. And instead of just getting mad or pissed off or whatever, use this to your advantage because they come in, they're saying, well, I want this guy. I'm just not going to send you a good offer right away because I want to know how dumb you are, if you're dumb at all. And instead, take that, send back a very competitive offer right off the rip, something that's maybe favoring you a little more than it should, maybe more than your usual comfort zone of what you're asking for in a trade. Maybe like where you want to ask for a second back, ask for that first. If you're asking for a third, and there's a third round pick in there, that's where you'd be comfortable. Ask for a second instead. Be aggressive in that counter and don't send anything too outlandish to where it's, where if you were in the league for a long time and somebody sent that to you, you'd be pissed off, but, just brush it off. It's just people being people and that's just what they're going to do. But, if you really think about it, usually when people leave leagues and teams open up, a lot of times there's league inactivity that leads up to it, and people just fall off the face of the earth, it seems. What's cool about that and why people are so interested in trying to trade with those teams right away and why they want to send you trades along with trying to see how dumb you are and how much they can rip you off. They also weren't able to trade for these players, for God knows how long, if that player was super inactive for a long time, and sometimes people leave amicably and, they don't just disappear off the face of the earth. They're like, well, season's over. I don't really have time to take over this team anymore. Can somebody else fill in? Whatever. That's fine. But imagine like just not being able to trade for Javonte Williams in a league. Imagine not being able to even send an offer for Justin Jefferson that is ever going to get looked at. Now people can send these offers. People can send these things to maybe get a player they wanted all summer long that they weren't able to even look at. It's one of those things where use that to your advantage because you're at least for a little bit going to be a hot commodity in that league in terms of trade interest and thing like that. If you have all this other stuff figured out, you can hammer out several trades in like the first day. And if they're good ones that you counter and, earn some respect, like right away, the crap offers are going to start going away and you're just going to get competitive offers. Maybe shouldn't say that because not everybody is good at sending competitive offers right off the rip, which is fine. We're working on it as a community. It is one of those things where let it happen, embrace it a little bit as much as it is just them really trying to see how dumb you are off the rip and how in the loop you are and how much you understand player values and things of that sort. But Zach, wrapping this up a little bit here, what are your thoughts on this? My thought process and when you're jumping into a new league and things of that nature, when you're getting these trade offers, how do you handle those offers and things that come knocking on your door like that?
It's funny that you brought that up because I am a little bit different than you in my approach there. And, we talked in the beginning about how I try to be a little bit vocal in the group chat. I take that opportunity to be vocal in the group chat. and I say, let's say at Bob Van sent me, Romeo Dobbs and a 3rd round pick for, Justin Jefferson. Justin Jefferson.
Of course.
Justin Jefferson, right? I'm going to go back to the league chat and I'm going to say, at Bob Van out here trying to see if I'm the new league dummy. And that makes people laugh. That makes people in the group chat go, oh, man, that guy, it's never backfired on me. And I don't, publicly reveal what the trade is. I just let people know, don't come at me with that. Like, don't come at me. Again, this goes back to being active, trying to cultivate relationships, and it's tongue in cheek. It is a true thing. Like this guy's out here trying to see if I'm a league idiot. But at the same time, like, hey, look, man, I'm a fun guy. I'm funny. Ha, come chat me up, whatever. I use that opportunity. I'm different. I'm way different than you with that.
I am so covert ops with my trading stuff. It's all in the DMs. I rarely discuss anything in the league chat. And that's just how I've always been. I just don't air my dirty laundry out there. Let's say I'm very let's just talk about it in the DMs and stuff and I will say that is true that you don't usually, say like exactly what the offer was, but you will call people out on trades. You will call people out on trades.
Don't air literally the public laundry, but you can like make a joke of it, make people laugh. And then I will go back in the DM and I'll be like, listen, man, that offer, it doesn't even warrant a counter. Like you can't come at me with that. And it makes, I explain this. It makes me not want to engage with you because how far off you are. And it lets them know immediately. All right, I gotta come correct when I'm in his inbox, and for me that works. It's very rare where it's like, oh, screw you, like that doesn't ever really happen because everybody's trying to have fun here. Everybody's trying to get away from their life's trials and whatnot. So we're all here to have a good time. So I use that twofold. I have that private conversation like, listen, I'm not even going to counter that. Come better. Come with a better offer. And then I'll use that in the group chat just to get the dialogue going. Yeah, this guy's trying to see if I'm the league idiot. What kind of suckers did you have here before me?
Yeah.
Make people laugh.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's all well and good. Yeah. And I'll be so in the DMs that, if I get a bad offer, it's just like, dude, it's way too early in the morning for me to be getting offers like this. Like I haven't had my coffee yet. We need to chill out with stuff like this.
Why don't you get back to me?
Yeah, right. I'm going to let that one sit there and let you think about what you just did because I ain't touching that. Anything else to add here, Zach? Wrapping this thing up at all together?
I think the last thing is just be patient, man. Like what I really see a lot of fantasy owners doing, this is not just an orphan team thing. This is just a general thing is like people making a plan and then altering course on that plan 2 months later.
Sure.
And we can talk about teams that do this philosophy in a startup draft, and then 2 months later, they're like, this team sucks. It's old. Let's, and we've seen that firsthand.
Yeah.
It happens all the time. And just like, don't do that because you're just setting yourself back even further. You're setting yourself back another draft class, another trade cycle, whatever it may be. Stick to the plan. If the plan doesn't work, it doesn't work. But like, at least you're going to be ahead of where you would have been if you now make a plan, change course. Oh, now I have to tank this season. Now I have to draft good players, but I already traded my first round pick. So somebody else has my first round pick, but my team's going to don't do that. Be patient with your plan, make a plan, stick to it, and don't let anybody else try to alter your course. I have a league. I love this guy. I one of my best friends in fantasy football. And he always tries to give me crap for having a 2-year plan. Like, dude, that's just the plan. Oh, well, you can trade now to compete. Like, I see your philosophy. I don't agree with it. I'm building a contender for the next 8 to 10 years, not the next 2 to 3 years. Don't let people peer pressure you into changing your plan. Have a plan, stick to it, and be steadfast in it.
I can agree with that. I think that's great advice. And I think, too, just you've touched on this already, just staying active. I mean, like you said, you have to look for every nook and cranny that you can find to give yourself that extra inch to take a mile. Whatever you can do, whether it's trading fab, whether it's picking up the flavor of the week to flip later just because you happen to have more fab, whatever the case is that you can do to just stay on top of it, because like you said, you're already so behind the eight ball. Usually these teams aren't good, and when they are, it's a heck of a lot easier to deal with. But when they're usually typically bad, like we've seen some of the audits we've done over the offseason or over this past offseason where they were orphan teams, they were terrible. And I mean, there were teams that they've done stuff since they took over the team to make the team better, and they're still bad teams. So it is just kind of one of those things, like you said, commit to the direction. I do think this comes with a small caveat of there could be a chance where, because this happened to me, where I went into full rebuild after year one after startup, where I'm just like, this did not go as planned. I need to restart, reformat. I had that 2-year plan in mind where I'm like, it's going to take me probably a full season to get to a competitive standpoint, maybe another one to be like a championship team. And what happened was I made a bunch of moves. I made like 15 trades over the offseason. It was absolutely insane. It was incredible. Probably one of my best off seasons trading I've ever had. And that comes with, getting proper value, just making good, projected decisions on what players I think are going to do well. And I was fully expecting to go into that year and suck. And I ended up winning the championship that year. So I had to kind of pivot my decision making to, and that was a very unique situation. I don't think most teams are going to do that. But it is kind of one of those where if you feel the team heading in that direction, I think you need to take a hard look at it and see, is this just kind of flash in the pan type stuff? Are these players really something to be excited about? Or are these players that are just going to wash up in a few weeks? Yeah. Where you can kind of go all in or out. And in all honesty, I don't think I made much in-season moves. I think I maybe made a couple trades during the season. So that team that I just built over one off season took off and just, kind of one of those crazy situations. Like I said, just I wasn't expecting it, and ended up winning the championship next year. Came in third last year. I was pissed, but and this year again, looks to be right at the top of the league. So it is one of those things where I definitely agree. Commit to a direction, because 90% of the time that's not going to happen. Sometimes you might catch fire, but you really need to take a look in the mirror of the team and be like, is this for real or is this a trap? Because you could easily trap yourself. Like you said, if you start making moves, if you have a ton of first round picks and this team's doing well, but you sell them all off. And if you have a ton of first round picks and your team's doing anything worthwhile, you can probably make the effort to make a run. But like you said, you might not be making as much of a long-term push as opposed to a 1-year push. So you definitely have to take all of that into consideration as well, because while I think pivoting should be in your playbook, it shouldn't be the first thing you go to.
At the end of the day, the goal is to win, right?
Yep.
I always say this: you win 1 year, you pay the next 10 years of your fantasy league off. So if you win and things go right, great. But like if you made a 2-year plan, hypothetically, and you're 3-11 year one, and you're like, oh, I gotta. No, you made a 2-year plan. Like stick to the plan.
Yeah,
a lot of times,
definitely.
And I'm not trying to keep like hyping up Dynasty Rewind or whatever, but like we have a Discord chat where we have trade advice, we have team build advice, we have this like rookie draft advice, this advice. Like use your peers, man. I ask my friends in other leagues about a new league I just took over. Like, hey, listen, I just took over this team. Here's the build. Here's the picks I have. Here's the offer. What do you think I should? And I do it in the Dynasty Rewind Discord all the time. Because sometimes I need a little bit of reassurance as to like, this is the right move here. So use those resources, use your friends, use us, use the Discord, whatever it may be. We have people put in the comment section, Bob, their team build and should I do this? And you reply all the time. So use your community, make sure that your plan is moving in the right direction. If you need to pivot, make sure that you get good advice. You go to people you trust.
Well, that is it for the video today. I do hope y'all enjoyed. Please, if you like, if you did, comment down below your thoughts on the video itself. Be sure to drop any other tips you may have or questions you may have when it comes to orphaned dynasty rebuilds. If you need more than just the video's help, be sure to head over to patreon.com/dynasty rewind. Get in our Discord group chat, join an amazing community, and get advice 24/7 from every single member of the team. And if you have any interest in that team being featured in a dynasty team audit video, be sure to check out the description box below for more details. And if you just need a little bit more tips when it comes to rebuilding, be sure to check out the 2 videos on your screen now. But hey, with all that said, that's going to be it for us today. We will see y'all in the next one. But until then, y'all have a good one. Good deal. I think that will be a wrap, unless you have anything else to add.
I love you, Bob.